There's a Jewish teaching story that talks about the nature of truth and the way that we receive it. And it goes something like this. Truth, naked and cold, had been turned away from every door in the village. Her nakedness frightened her people. When the parable found her, she was huddled in a corner, shivering and hungry. Taking pity on her, the parable gathered her up and took her home. There she dressed truth in story, warmed her and sent her out again. Cloaked in story, truth knocked again on the doors and was readily welcomed into the villagers' houses. They invited her to eat at the tables and warm herself by their fires. I'd imagine that for most of us, we can receive real truth in our lives a bit easier when it's a story that we can access, that we are hearing, one that perhaps we can find ourselves within. And these stories can be ones from sacred texts like the parables of Jesus in the New Testament, or they can be human stories from anywhere and anyone. I think about a story that is most beloved in my house, a simple one called Through the Looking Glass. And it is a story basically where Alice in Wonderland comes from. And you may remember beyond the Disney version that there is a moment where Alice finds herself completely lost, as if she's ever really found in this story. But she found herself at a crossroads and also found herself in front of a slyly smiling Cheshire cat. And this cat listened to her and some of her concerns. Specifically, she was asking this Cheshire cat for advice and said, "Would you tell me, please, which way I ought to go from here?" And the cat said, "Well, that depends solely upon where you think you're going." And she said, "I don't know exactly where I want to go. I don't much care where." And the cat said, "Well, then it doesn't matter which way you choose to go at all. So long as I get somewhere," she added as an explanation. And the cat said, "Oh, sure, you can do that if you only walk enough, a long way." There's a sense where each and every one of us find ourselves in that crossroads where we're having to ask ourselves the question, where are we going and why? I know last week, as I was able to listen to live feed while we were with kids on a short vacation for fall break, John Fletcher really opened this reality up for us as a congregation in a way that I found helpful. And he not only stated the reality we find ourselves in as a church, but not just the facts, ma'am, but the emotions of that reality as well. Ones where we may find ourselves not knowing exactly where to go or how to be as a church in this changing environment around us that brings forward all sorts of feelings of uncertainty, perhaps even insecurity, sometimes scarcity, but if we allow ourselves, wonder, excitement, maybe even a feeling that grows of a small bit of adventure, I hope. And we use the mustard seed as a way to remember that even in the midst of these times, faith that is as small as a mustard seed can have a huge impact and oftentimes can change everything. So in the same way, I'm thinking about this coin, and if you have a coin or any other point of focus in your hands right now, just allow it to roll around in your fingers. Because When I think about a coin, it is just a representation of the talents, the money unit, if you will, that is in this story from Jesus today. But a coin, because it really does deal with this emotional quandary we have whenever we leave our lives and our futures, or even our most immediate decisions, wherever they are, whatever they may be, up to chance. At least in this coin situation, heads or tails, 50-50 shot. But often the questions we face and the opportunities afforded ahead of us are not always so simple, often much more complex they are, and we may have more time at the crossroads to take for fear of not taking the right road. Through all of these stories that Jesus tells, the ones that you will hear over this series, over these 4 weeks, and the more that are in Holy Scripture, Jesus is just doing something simple. Jesus is not trying to scare us. Jesus is not trying to manipulate, even though there is an inspirational aspect to this in many of the stories. But all Jesus is trying to do is tell us the truth. To tell us really, in practical terms, what real life is like. He talks to us not just on the basis of how we wish things were in an aspirational way, but on exactly how they are. Then, and even now, in a timeless way. This particular story that we hear isn't a story of kindness or severity from the master. We might include the character of God in some way with this character in the story. It isn't a story just of kindness or severity, but a simple report on how our life works and how discernment in the human life can work for good or for ill. So if we look at the story and we consider all of the ways that these different characters might interact with our everyday going and coming human life, we might notice a few things. Like the master, for instance. It might be really easy to write this person off, to say, well, they're a bit harsh, right? And yet, I hope that as you reread this story through the week, and as maybe you consider it even further through our devotional guide, you will find that the focus to place on the master is not in the response that the master makes to those who invested his talents in all sorts of different ways, but I focus on this key word of entrust with this person. And I believe that it's the word that Jesus wants us to see and hear, even feel to our bones as well. That this master, the character of their commitment to these people is rich and deep and profound. I want you to think about the last time that you entrusted your most cherished thing or even person to someone else. Whether it be picking someone to look after your children, or maybe a house sitter as you're gone for a long time away. Maybe it's the choice that you make about a school to go to for your family, or your financial advisor, someone who helps to guide you with things that just feel like gobbledygook to muck through and are very dear and close to the heart. If you've ever entrusted anything or anyone you cherish to another, you know that it was not done lightly, and that you have to know these people intimately and do your research before even that handing over or entrusting for a time can even happen where you can sleep at peace at night. There's care and love and intention in choosing someone. And so as the master chose these 3 people with all sorts of different capacities, and you can see it in the way that the gifts, for lack of a better word, are doled out. They were entrusted in today's terms with millions and millions of dollars, a lifetime of wages for many of us in this room. And you can imagine with that kind of weight, it would be very easy to have that weight kind of burn through your pocket or lay heavy on your proverbial shoulders. But I want you to notice that this master gave and entrusted these things to the servants in his care with a generous freedom. It's said in this book called Parables from the Backside. Callis, a professor at Asbury Seminary, talks a bit about how he asked them to invest these things, but gave very little directive, if any at all, on the how or the exact ways that they were supposed to. They were trusted to figure it out. Just as we so many times in our lives find ourselves not knowing what to do next and kind of feeling blown by the wayside, or not seen, or not heard, or felt maybe isolated, left alone, or abandoned. That for some can be the very worst news and the most awful results to experience and encounter in life. But that thing that feels like abandonment to one is a generous freedom and opportunity to another. And so we all kind of face that counting of what we have done with what we are given at some point. For some of us, it is at intermittent times in life. For some of us, it is that seminal point where we cross from this life to the next. But these servants that hear the master's voice, I can tell you, even though it was not explicitly said, all these servants want is one thing. And it is the words that I often get the privilege of saying over families, and you could hear in the story as well, in the story and at funerals, this whole statement of well done, good and faithful servant. For the master, for in our case, our God, to be proud of what we have done, of what we have become, who we are, of how we have tended our time and everything in our grasp and attention. All of us, as we face God daily and as we face God ultimately, this is what we want to hear and to know, that God is pleased. I wonder how you encounter the story in yourself. When I see the servants, the first two, even being a bit adventurous in spirit myself, I found encountering the story again, the first comment I internally had was, man, it stinks to kind of look at people that seem to have stuff like this come so easy. The sensibility of what to do or where to go or how to go about doing things that feel so weighty and consequential in life. Maybe you can identify with me too, that for some, they've just got it, it seems. And for the rest of us, we find ourselves still holding the bag, wondering how in the world we're going to do this thing called life, or whatever life is directly in front of us. It's like when I think about these first two, think of the quote from Ralph Waldo Emerson that says, "All I have seen teaches me to trust the Creator with all I have not seen." And I want you to hear that for these first two, even as we might bat them off saying that they're a bit reckless, it is their very seeming recklessness that is actually a wisdom of trust that Jesus is lifting. And for the third servant, one that no doubt we have found ourselves identifying with more than most, I imagine that this person lacked a bit of self-confidence. Maybe they did well enough under other people's kind of exquisite direction, but when making decisions for themselves, found it a bit more difficult. Professor Callis talked about it like this. He said, I want to know more about this timid, shy soul. What made him like this? Was it coming from a long line of defeated people? There are some pockets and places where defeat is the order of life. No one expects him to succeed, and no one expects anyone else to succeed either. It is the definition of an encounter with scarcity, with no teacher or neighbor or mentor to inspire him or talk to him, remind him about his potential. He was afraid. For many of us, we find ourselves in places in time where we feel inadequate or not quite enough for that which is before us. It can become a fear that is paralyzing when we are called to take a risk, even for a good purpose. Maybe you and I might bury that opportunity, what we think is just for a time, but it stays there. And we might find that it's harder and harder to dig out the long that it stays beyond the light. Friends, today I want you to hear from me truth that I have to remind myself of all the time, that God knows us inside and out. God knows our ability. God knows what we have the capacity to do as it meets God's desire for the world. God didn't give up on the one that didn't seem like he could handle it. He gave him exactly what he could. God has given us all amazing opportunities in life in all sorts of different ways. And maybe there are things that hold us back. Whether it is a fear of using our literal talents that we might not measure up, or maybe we'll measure up too well. Like I hear in the church a lot, if I volunteer too well, that I'm going to have more work given to me, right? The whole voluntold bit. Friends, on those days of self-doubt for you and for me, I pray that we will find a way to at least not bury the gold. That we would find a way to keep it in our hands, whether they be our financial resources that we have the opportunity to tend and to share in extravagant ways, or if they are the gifts of our variability or time. Wonder, as you hold your coin, do you ask yourself today, and just take stock of what are those very things, and in what ways are you and I allowing our talents in all of their forms to be used right now? Which ones are actually being let into the light for others to benefit from and to share, for us to actually enjoy in the sharing? And in what ways right now are you and I perhaps allowing our talents to be hidden? Through this truth-cloaked story, God is inviting you and me to live with new intention. And God is calling you in your sense of maybe inadequacy or uncertainty or even helplessness to break free and bring your precious talents, gold, gifts, and time to the light. Whatever that may look like, I pray that we will have the courage to at least open our hands and, even in reckless and extravagant ways, begin to trust our Maker to walk the path, to make the first step, and to ask exactly where, by the power of our Master and Maker, we are to go. It is in the name of God, who was and is to come, that we offer this word, this reflection, and even our questions today. Amen.